Alright, for my scene, I had chapter 9, which was pulling the strings, and for my accumulation of all my 3 scenes, I really wanted to display like the chaos that was taking place, because it was a very like short scene, and it all kind of took place within one general area, but I wanted to, like I said, maintain that concept of chaos. So these are just the coloring samples I used. I used the black and white, and then I used a very, very light blue, and then a red for my other colors. And then to do my characters, I kind of wanted to go out of the usual, like making the bad guy red, especially in this case because like to be a good con man, you have to fit in with your environment, and you have to basically act as a normal person does in order to pull off like what you're trying to get across. So for Professor Marcus, I started off with this character right here. I hated the mouth because it looked like he had braces, and so I gave him the like crescent smile, as you can see in my second one, as well with his scarf, because in this scene especially, as well as a lot of the other scenes, he always has his green scarf on. But for the scene that I was going to be using him in, he is definitely not happy because he's freaking out along with all the other con men, and so I wanted to take away the smile and give him kind of a facial expression that would ensure like a sense of chaos. And then so for Major Courtney, I started off with this character right here, but especially with the fedora, or not the fedora, the hat, it looked too much like Louis' fedora, which I thought was really confusing because you wouldn't be able to tell, although I will differentiate later on by drastically changing what Louis looks like. But anyway, so I gave him a black outline as well as his mustache, and then I gave him that kind of chaotic looking circular facial expression, and I tipped him on his side because he was freaking out. And so I thought that was a good way to portray movement, and the fact that he was kind of under a lot of stress and trying to cope with the situation. And then so for Louis, I started off, Louis is one of those characters, he's a very like slim, kind of the stereotypical con man. And so I started off with this skinny character right here, added the fedora, and then I actually gave him the only like fully black suit as well as the black eyebrows, because he is the character that he's kind of the very sleek criminal of the gang, and I wanted to portray that. And there was one round they made him a lot bigger, gave him the outline and then the stereotypical balding haircut as well as the facial expression. And this is Wilberforce. I started off with the circle and triangle. I made it red then to kind of portray that she was the target, but then it didn't really allow me to get the full like descriptive sense of being able to portray like what she might look like, which I did in the very end by showing her hat as well as kind of the innocent little eyes. And then I just have the telephone process work as well as my telephone booth. So for my first slide, I wanted to kind of play around. I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep that idea of the actual like caged-in telephone booth. So I just started with this red block just to kind of see which I liked more. And then I realized I liked the actual look of the actual telephone booth because it kind of was a little bit more descriptive, and it was easier to actually tell what it was. So I have them both, like I said, in this kind of like a strange position to kind of portray that sense of chaos, and that they're talking on the phones. And then I wasn't really getting like the chaotic sense that I like wanted to portray by that horizontal line that was just kind of equally separating the two frames. And so I gave that little jagged line down the center to kind of add to the dramatic effect and make it seem like a little bit more like broken and skewed. And I also changed the background color to that like a purplish color, but then I realized I would have to kind of make the decision of what color I wanted to use, because then I went out of the color scheme guidelines. And so I ultimately just made the scene just that lighter, faded, really light blue. just to give it a little bit of sense of color, not that everything was just washed out. In this scene, I have Professor Marcus being on the other end of the line, seeing this the car come back to the train station, and then I have the red box as like the trunk, but you couldn't really tell it was a trunk, and you also couldn't really tell it was Professor Marcus by the way I had it. And so I added the lines to portray a little bit more of a sense of chaos and kind of to make the trunk a little bit more descriptive so you could tell what it was. And then I added Professor Marcus's features to, again, or not Professor Marcus, Major Courtney, his features to allow you to differentiate who he was. And I added Mrs. Wilberforce in the back of the car. But I originally had, I didn't include it for some reason, but I had her entire like body, and I didn't think that looked really realistic, so I cut her off so it looks like she's actually in the car. And then this is my final scene, which is I wanted to portray like how the criminals are trying to have, they're having to make these like really hard, difficult decisions of, you know, how are they going to alter their plan, how are they going to keep Mrs. Wilberforce quiet when they're all like huddled around the telephone booth trying to figure out what to do. And you have Professor Marcus who's shouting over the phone to keep Major Courtney kind of in line and calm in order to tell them like what she's doing. And then I tilted the other two criminals as well, just to kind of add to that sense of, you know, they weren't calm either. They were also like freaking out to try and figure out what to do because none of them had the answers what to do. And then I also added the kind of like talking lines to portray the sense that they were also like shouting and trying to figure out what to do. And that was my final scene.
There's a slider on the right there. You might want to make those a little bit bigger because I don't think people can catch enough detail yet. We'll just get it, as long as we get it down to the bottom, we can make them fairly big. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
I really like how you portrayed Louis in all black, and like that the coat is really cool, I think.
I'm just wondering, with this your second scene where Major Courtney, he has, I think it's his ear, the circle on the side.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if, because to me at first it just like didn't really look like a circle. I was wondering if you had a reason behind having his ear in there.
Well, I just kind of wanted to like make sure that you were aware that it was like his side profile, because I thought it might get a little bit confusing, you know, if I just like didn't have anything there, because I don't know, it just kind of looked kind of skewed in his facial. You wouldn't really know
Does
what
it
he
have
was
to
doing.
be his side profile?
Well, I just wanted to show that he was like kind of looking out. I guess I could have done it a little bit differently.
I just want to say that I don't think there's anything wrong with using front face there and making we know he's talking on the phone because of the phone, and by the way, all the talk lines need to go because they're not necessary and it's getting too much meta discourse. And they actually can cause some confusion here with Courtney at the side. It wouldn't hurt if Courtney is not looking actually an absolute profile. We know basically what he's looking at.
In your first final scene, I'm just wondering why you put Professor Marcus back on his face and then you brought back his crooked smile.
Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about that. Because he ultimately is the one that's taking control of the situation, and I realized once I like re-watched the scene, in order to like portray this concept of chaos that I'm trying to show, that doesn't come into play for him until a little bit later, because he's the one that kind of just casually walks in with his watch into the telephone booth, It sets it on and like, has the phone call perfectly timed and is trying to talk Major Courtney through it very calmly. And so I wanted
You said that you wanted it to look like Mrs. Wilberforce was in the car, but if the box is in the car, you can see the entire box.
Well, like the box on in the movie, those older cars have like I don't know, like the flip down side. So yeah, you could see the entire box, or like the majority of the trunk in the movie. And so I don't know, that's what I want to show.
Maybe you could like add like a window where Mrs. Wilberforce was, like
Yeah.
a square around her.
Yeah,
I think
well,
that
like I
would
said,
be
I have
good.
that, but it's kind of covered up.
Or have
It's
it
kind of
spoiled.
like filled in with the different colors, because the car is supposed to be like the bluish color and the window's white.
Yeah, even a line indicating a window would help us retain the car shape, I think. Because it doesn't have to look literally entirely like the car in the movie itself.
I was kind of like going off what she said. Like Mrs. Wilberforce kind of looks like she has like a halo on her head, like she looks like an angel. So I don't know if you could like define her hair more or make it.
Actually, I thought that was kind of effective because she's the innocent one in the whole thing. She still doesn't know what she did. I did catch that. I was thinking it looked a little like a halo. So maybe the question is you either have to make it look more like a halo or less like a halo, just to get off that border edge there. I want to point out something here though. You actually have more space that's usable on these slides, and the figures for the amount of detail they have are relatively small. Now I like the way you've made the phones bigger because the phones are the important part of that there. In your scene, do the other characters, I can't remember where it starts and cuts off, do the other characters try to get in the phone booth?
Yeah, that's like at the very, very end of my scene.
What I'm thinking is that, see, the phone booth, as it's the British design of the phone booth at that point, is very much like a cage, and the bird cages, the phone booths, the railings, etc., are all associated in the notion of confining or imprisoning the evil people. And if we could make the figure of the actual phone book just slightly larger, and I mean slightly larger, so it's still contained in both of those there. So you can make the characters just slightly larger, still want the outside telephone, but I think you use the space a little more and get that sense of confinement if you actually have the characters almost leaning in or trying to get in, particularly in that very last stage.
Okay.
I think you've got some really, really good ideas going on here, but I think that you could do some tweaking. Anybody else have any suggestions about that? Because this notion of everywhere they look, there are symbols of being behind bars really works well, that you've got the red phone booth and you've got the, some prisoners actually in the cage.
I was just gonna say that you also changed Major Courtney's hat from the first final scene to the second.
Oh, it's just
Yeah, because you didn't want it to look so much like the fedora. But see, in that last scene, if you had both of them crooked, but both of them leaning in toward the booth or closer to that, you get that sense of confinement and the prison image there a little more closely, I think. Because it's all through the film, and that's why you have the bird cages and stuff too. Nice job.